And I'm going to make funny faces at the camera. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Thank you for watching. I am here with Peter Hague. Peter Hague is, if I'm not mistaken, an astrophysicist. He has a blog at planetocracy.substack.com. There is a link to his blog in the video description below. Check the video description below. He wrote a blog post, Why Mars, which captivated me. Those who can see, I'm wearing the Mars landing t-shirt. There's a link to it in the chat. There's a link to that in the video description as well. I wanted to, he said some things in the article. I'm very focused on Mars, but he said some things I wasn't prepared for, and I really enjoyed it. Hello, everyone. So Peter, before we get started, would you please tell everyone a little bit about yourself? You're an astrophysicist. How'd you get involved in that? Where are you?
At the moment, I did my PhD in astrophysics at the University of Leicester from 2011 to 2015. And after that, I just went through some normal postdoc jobs at places like Durham and Cambridge for my main research focus was galaxies, rotation curves, and kinematics, and the implications for dark matter halos. So this was not directly related to sort of space exploration itself, but around about well, actually it was in December 2015, this time when SpaceX managed to pull off the first booster landing, I really sort of started to pay attention a lot more to space exploration. And while I was doing my last postdoc at Cambridge, I kind of had a bit of a side project where I developed a model for tracking the progress of space development, which I refer to as mass value. Essentially, it's just normalizing mass that you kind of getting all the mass that you place at different points in the solar system, like on the surface of Mars, on the surface of the Moon, or in solar orbit, and kind of fixing it onto a single scale, so you can calculate kind of a sort of a GDP figure, I guess. And from that, I've kind of moved into kind of general space advocacy with my blog. I'm presently working as a software engineer, so I'm not actively researching as an astrophysicist anymore. But I've now moved a lot more strongly in the direction of space advocacy, which I think is a important direction at the moment.
Okay. So you mentioned the first booster landing. I just want to say, for those who follow me probably know this, but if those who don't follow me, that was like a huge moment for me. I feel like that was turning science fiction into reality. And it's actually what started me as a Tesla investor. I mean, I was a fan of Elon Musk before, but that just sort of leveled up for me. Everything leveled up. Did that moment have a special meaning to you?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the beginning of SpaceX, I was actually quite skeptical when they started, because I had no idea who Elon Musk was. And I just heard like this guy from Silicon Valley come in with a load of money, and he's going to launch rockets better than NASA. And the first 3 he launches all like end up at the bottom of the sea. So I thought, well, obviously he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to give up. But obviously he didn't give up. And by the time he got to sort of 2015 and they were pulling off these rocket landings, I realized these guys were really serious. They were going to do all these things they said, and that there was sort of a change in the air.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't normally do this, but this doesn't normally happen. I just want to shout out to Tom Scambolone is in the chat. Tom Scambolone is somebody I think has known me since maybe 1st or 2nd grade. We went to elementary school together, middle school and high school together. So hi, Tom. Thank you very much for joining the chat and watching the video. Like blows me away when somebody I know from that long ago is involved. So you mentioned mass placement as a model for understanding. So there's this concept of delta V. For people who don't know this, it's when you're trying to get somewhere in the solar system, and effectively the way you get there is by changing your velocity. I think that's something that's really hard for people to, I mean, I guess orbital mechanics is something that's really hard for people to grasp.
Yeah.
Would you say that's fair?
It's counterintuitive, especially with the things like delta V. Like it takes about 9 kilometers per second of delta V to get from the surface of the Earth to an orbit about the same altitude as the ISS,
Right.
which is like, if you have like a normal 30 centimeter wide globe, it's like a centimeter off the surface, I think, roughly.
Right.
That takes
And
9. To get to Mars from there, it takes 6.
from there.
Yeah.
So
5 or
it's
6.
really hard to get out of the Earth's gravity well.
Yeah.
Even to the edge of the Earth's gravity well.
Yeah.
And then once you're out of most of the Earth's gravity well, it's a lot easier to go places. And that's actually going to come up later in this. We're going to talk about an article that Peter wrote. Peter's article is titled "Why Mars." Again, it's on planetocracy.substack.com, which is link is in the description to the entire blog, and you have to click the. It's something. It's a membership site, but he lets anyone read the content, at least for
it's
now.
all free.
Yeah. So this article, "Why Mars." Peter talks about a concept that he actually confronted an idea that I've had in my head that other people have said, I guess, and he explained why I was wrong. So I have this perspective about Mars, and I now know that I'm wrong, that, well, look, Antarctica is really close by comparison, has breathable air. There's literally a tweet from a guy named Doug Saunders, who's a blue check mark, which automatically tells you there's something funny on Twitter. He said, it's 2021 and the entire continent of Antarctica still has a permanent population of 0, despite having a breathable atmosphere and drinkable water and being a 3-hour flight from major cities. I don't know if the 3-hour flight is really accurate. I think it might be a little more than 3 hours, but
I don't know. I've never been.
But nevertheless, it's not a 6-month journey. So I actually thought that was a pretty good argument for, Mars is really hard. We really want to go there. It's going to be hard to get people to go there. We don't really get a lot of people going to Antarctica, which would be a lot easier trip, you would think. So you answered the question better than anyone I've seen before. Why is, I can read the article to the people, but I want to ask you, why is Mars so much better than Antarctica?
Well, mostly it's about energy. Just firstly, looking at the surface area of Mars, the amount of solar energy it collects is far greater than the amount that falls on Antarctica, because Antarctica is right at the bottom of the globe, and I have a little diagram on this. And so very little sunlight.
I'll show them the diagram while you're talking.
So very little sunlight falls on it, and that's
this is Antarctica. The circle at the bottom is Antarctica, basically, right?
Yeah, the little dot. So that's the Antarctic Circle, which is roughly contiguous with Antarctica itself, and that's at the vernal or autumnal equinox. If it's in summer, you get a bit more, but if it's at winter, the entire Antarctic Circle is facing away from the sun for months at a time.
So your number for me was that Mars gathers about 10 times as much energy as Antarctica.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
steadily rather than intermittently, because for half the year, for months of the year, Antarctica gets 0.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously that'll be a problem if you went to the poles at Mars, because Mars actually has a similar axial tilt to the Earth. But realistically, we're going to go to equatorial areas on Mars, where you're going to have a 24-hour and 40-minute day-night cycle. So if you're using solar energy for electricity, or if you're using it to grow plants, that's going to be a lot easier on Mars than it is in Antarctica.
Okay, so, and I think another way you put it is that Mars captures about 40% of the energy of Earth's land area.
Yeah.
So why is energy so important? Why is it more important maybe than breathable air or drinkable water? I think Mars actually has drinkable water, so that's misleading.
Well, it has water. I don't know if it's drinkable.
It will be drinkable once you clean. It'll be easily cleaned.
Well, the thing is, if you talk about when it's cleaned, then Earth has more drinkable water than you could possibly use. You just have to desalinate it.
No. Right.
And which takes energy. Thing is, drinkable water and air are not particularly difficult to make, but I mean, they will take some energy.
Right.
So.
But isn't breathable air important? Isn't having large quantities of water available really important? Why is energy more important?
Because, well, if you have lots of air and water, but you don't have much energy, well, you can breathe and you can drink, but you can't do anything else really. So if you think of almost any economic transaction you think of, you can immediately see there's an energy cost involved with it. If you order something, it gets to be transported there. If you buy a coffee at a coffee shop, they have to heat up the water. And the thing is, once you've paid your money to whoever's providing this service, they're going to themselves spend it on other stuff, which has energy content. So some of your money will go to the energy content of the goods and services you buy, and some of your money will go to things that don't have immediate energy content. But that money, unless it gets sort of saved or sort of shuffled into the financial system, other people will spend it on energy. So ultimately, any kind of pound or dollar you trace through the economy is going to land on an energy product at some point.
When we talk about Tesla, we talk about batteries being the limiting factor. That until Tesla have enough batteries, they can't make enough cars. They can't make energy storage. They can't really produce and sell solar panels unless they have energy storage to go with it. So that batteries are sort of a limiting factor. Is energy really the limiting factor for humanity?
Ultimately, yes, because well, certainly on the very large scales. If you look at this of the Earth orbiting the Sun, it's about a distance of about 150 million kilometers. And if you were to consider the sort of a sphere of that radius, with like the sun's rays going out in all directions, the amount that sort of goes into empty space rather than hits the small surface of the Earth, it outweighs the sunlight that hits the Earth by a factor of about 2 billion. So, I mean, we might not be strictly limited in everything we do in energy now, but the kind of civilization we can construct is energy limited, because one that even took a fraction of that energy would not fit on Earth.
Right. So you actually have in your article, you say, in one respect, we are already a Kardashev type 1 civilization, one that uses all the energy available to a planet. And that refers to, I think it's called the Kardashev Scale.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of a hypothetical, what level of advancement or development has a civilization reached based on how much energy it gets either from its planet, its star, or its galaxy, or
the original formulation from I think 1964, the paper by Nikolai Kardashev. He was thinking about extraterrestrial civilizations, and he just had 3 discrete categories. It's just level, type 1, which has the energy resources of a planet. Type 2 has the energy resources of an entire solar system, and type 3 has the energy resources of a galaxy.
Right.
Since then, you can, because there's about 10 orders of magnitude between each of them, you can kind of fit a log scale to them, so you can have intermediate values. And typically people argue that we're 0.7 or 0.8 on a Kardashev scale. But as I sort of point out in the article, when you have an industrial civilization living on a biosphere, it kind of gets a bit fuzzy to say what we're using and what we're not, because you could very easily argue that we're using the entire Amazon rainforest by the current government of Brazil notwithstanding not logging it all. So we preserve energy using parts of the biosphere that we could otherwise hack down and pave with solar panels, because we've made a choice. So we've placed value on the ecosystem and we are putting them to use.
Right. Well, I think the way you describe it is the biosphere uses all the energy that hits virtually all the energy the sun hitting the earth. I mean, I suppose photosynthesis is not fully efficient. I suppose some of it goes to waste heat.
But it's not waste heat because it's warming the planet up.
It's warming the planet. Fair enough.
If the planet was minus 200 degrees, then there'd be no plants.
Right. So we're effectively, does that mean that Kardashev, the Kardashev 1, like the idea that any planet like ours is a Kardashev 1 planet?
Again, I just think the scale doesn't work very well below 1. because you could argue that we only became a Kardashev 1 in the mid 20th century, because that was the point. Around about the mid 20th century, we got to the point where we could operate long term at the South Pole. We reached the deepest ocean trench. We got to the point where we could basically go anywhere on Earth and operate there and use it for our own purposes if we wanted to, and if we had enough money.
Right.
So at that point, we are willingly not using parts of the Earth.
Okay, and for people who don't get it, like the next level would be that we, I don't know, enclose our sun in a Dyson sphere. Somebody mentioned this in the chat. We somehow build a Dyson sphere around the sun and capture all the energy from the sun, which would be a rather gargantuan task.
It would, although the science fiction depiction of Dyson sphere is not usually very accurate. In Star Trek, they had one in, and it was a solid shell, which wouldn't be gravitationally stable, because the gravitational forces of the sun would just be cancelled out perfectly. And also the entire inner surface was living area. What's more likely is what's called Dyson swarm, where it's lots of sort of free moving things which almost completely obscure the sun.
Right.
And most of them would probably be mirrors. So you'd capture energy on mirrors, you'd reflect it to like
point sources that turn that energy into heat.
Yeah, or furnaces
or electricity.
To process directly. Yeah.
Right. Dyson swarm, I like it. And did you ever read the novel Ringworld by Niven?
Yes, I have read that.
So if you haven't seen it, there's a novel Ringworld. Oh, Jim Whitehead brings up Ringworld right at the exact same time. Jim Whitehead is a moderator in the chat. Ringworld is this idea that they built a ring around a star, and it captures all that energy. And so, all right, let me see. Hang on. I don't want to lose track of where we are. So I'm going to go a little further in your article. I want to read this quote from, I don't know if this is from you or from someone else. You wrote this, describing the unique appeal of Mars from a dispassionate economic perspective. Mars offers lots of unused energy impinging on raw materials we can easily use at a location where accessing more energy is much easier. So the lots of unused energy is the sunlight hitting the planet, right? And I guess in a sense it's warming Martian atmosphere, but a lot of that heat escapes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Impinging on raw materials we can easily use, meaning there's material on Mars that we can use. There's in situ resources.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, for a start, the atmosphere itself. The first thing that's going to be done on Mars is fuel production, and this has been planned since the Mars Direct proposal from about 1990 by Robert Zubrin. This idea that if you take like a little bit of hydrogen with you, you can react with the CO2 in the atmosphere and produce methane and oxygen. Although you do need to supplement that with a process where you just break up the oxygen, the CO2 into carbon monoxide and oxygen. But that process has just been demonstrated, I believe, on the Mars rover. So
that's commonly known as the Sabatier process.
The Sabatier is one when you get hydrogen and carbon dioxide go to methane, and methane and steam. So you then need to electrolyze the steam to get the oxygen out, and then the hydrogen goes back into the process.
Okay, and the idea there is, sorry, methane is CH4 and oxygen is O2.
Yep.
And that so happens to be the fuel for Starship.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's not a coincidence. I'm sure that Elon Musk was thinking of this.
Yeah, he's very clear about it. So, and now that we know that there's water on Mars, or we believe there's water on Mars, that may make it easier to produce methane and I guess LOX, liquid oxygen, for Starship to either return to Earth or go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So raw materials we can easily use. There's probably other minerals on Mars that can be mined. There's the rocket fuel and maybe generating oxygen for breathable air.
Yeah.
So, and then you say at a location where accessing more energy is much easier. What did you mean by that?
The escape velocity of Mars is a lot lower. So if you've seen pictures of the Starship and Super Heavy stack, the full thing, it needs that Super Heavy booster to get out of Earth's gravity. on Mars, the Starship can just go to orbit on its own. It doesn't need the super heavy. So if you imagine you've established an industrial base on Mars, and you can build your own spacecraft there, it just becomes a lot easier to then go elsewhere in the solar system from the surface of Mars than the surface of the Earth.
Well, you don't have to build your own if there are ships arriving from Earth and you just use them again.
Yeah, I mean payloads. Although I imagine they might start building starships on Mars fairly soon in the process, or I'm not sure. Probably not the rat. Sorry, go on.
Well, my understanding is that Elon's plan is to get 1 million people to Mars in the next 20, 30 years.
That's ambitious.
And in order to do that, you're going to need 10,000 starships delivering payloads, and some of them will come back and carry more, but that round trip is, it's 6 months there, 6 months back, and you have to wait 18 months between trips because the planets have to align, right?
Yeah.
And actually, this is a question I have for you. How hard is it to get, how much delta V, I guess, do you need to get from Earth to Mars if they're not in that, I forget what the term is. There's a moment when they're not in the window. There's a window when Mars and Earth are close. How much more delta V? Is it just become impossible, or is it so ridiculous?
Basically, yes, but also the fact that you get very long travel times when it's in the wrong place as well. There's these things called pork chop plots which show this, and you can show the windows. And I don't know what the sort of, if it's in like exactly between two windows, or if it's any possible way of doing it, but no, I wouldn't have thought there's any reasonable possibility of getting in there between windows.
Right. Okay. So for those who don't know, the Earth and Mars both orbit the sun, and they don't travel around together. So they're traveling around at different speed. I think the Mars orbit is 684 days, 684 Earth days, and the Earth orbit is 365 or so Earth days. So probably 75+% of the time, maybe it's more than 75% of the time. Maybe it's 80, 90% of the time.
Well, the windows are separated by 26 months, which is what's called a synodic cycle. It's a time for Earth and Mars to come back to the same relative position. And the launch window is a couple of months wide.
Right. So 2 months out of 26 months is 1/13.
3 months maybe. Yeah.
Is 1/13. So it's more than 90% not travelable. So for people, I think people, if you watch too much science fiction, it seems like, well, it's just, out there, we'll just go. And it's like really hard to get there if they're not in the window, and the window is short. So, but you have this line that at a location where accessing more energy is much easier. I think you mean we can get the energy on Mars, and then once we've accumulated enough, once we've accessed a lot of Mars energy or all of Mars energy, there's other places we might go to access more.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Right. Because getting more energy in this context is just a matter of finding more places that sunlight falls on, or building more places if you're going to start constructing a Dyson swarm.
And you wrote, and this is all, I would say, Jeff Bezos, this puts you in the Jeff Bezos camp a little bit. You wrote that it leads to the O'Neillian conclusion that humanity should ultimately live in free-floating habitats, that the total surface area of solid bodies in the solar system is too small if we really want to start exploiting our home star. So you see a future of, I guess, like you said, the Dyson swarm.
Long term, yeah.
Not in the next 10 years. We're talking 120, 100, 200 plus years away. We're not going to fully exploit the energy on Mars for a while.
Yeah.
Right. And then, but this is the point. This is what you wrote. Once a branch of human civilization is established on Mars, it can much more easily access the remaining energy of the solar system, because it's funny, somebody wrote this. Jim White. I don't know if Jim White had read your article, but you wrote, the escape velocity of Mars is only 5 kilometers per second compared to 11.2 kilometers per second for Earth. And he also mentioned the air resistance. How much harder does it make it to get off this rock that we have this dense atmosphere?
Well, that's one of the main things. I mean, the biggest thing really is gravity, because We actually live on the hardest surface in the planet to escape from, because we have the highest gravity of any of the rocky planets. The gas giants and the sun have higher gravity than us, but they don't have surfaces. So literally where you're standing at now, is just the most difficult place to get away from in the solar system.
So you're saying like the surface of Jupiter might not be that hard to get away from
There's no
because,
surface on Jupiter.
well, you know what I mean? The edge of the gas.
No, the edge of Jupiter is a lot harder to get away from.
Okay.
But like I said, out of the solid surfaces that you can stand on, this is the hardest.
Out of the solid surfaces. So Mercury might be easier, at least to get out of Mercury's gravity well, and not necessarily the sun's gravity well.
Yeah.
Ceres, I think you mentioned in your article, has a lower escape velocity than Mars, but it's far from the sun and small, so it's energy poor. Thaddeus earlier in the chat asked about Mercury. Isn't Mercury a potentially good candidate, or is it because it's so close to the sun, it probably gets a high amount of energy?
Oh yeah, but the things with Mercury is it's got a very slow rotation period, so you've got the same sort of intermittency problem. I believe there's, I'm not sure if this has been verified or not, but there may be ice in the poles of Mercury in the same way there is at the poles of the moon.
Yeah.
Which might be a good resource.
So I have this impression of Mercury as it must be incredibly hot. And you're saying there still might be water ice on the poles.
Well, yes, because you've got no atmosphere. Well, it has what's called sort of an exosphere. There's not like a static amount of gas around it. There's just constant sort of outgassing from the surface. But because there's no proper atmosphere, there's nothing to transfer the heat around. Okay. So you can have these huge temperature differentials between light and dark parts. The same with the moon.
Okay. Okay, so let me see. So I guess that, you know, we see these names. I feel like I see it all the time. I think I just saw it from Greta Thunberg, and maybe that, not saying she said it recently, but I just saw it from something she said. There's this idea that people feel like, well, we shouldn't be spending resources going out into space because we've got problems here on Earth. I don't know if this is part of your article. I don't think this is part of your article, but it's really not that much of our resources to get out there.
I've had this thought that that people should advocate for 1% of government spending on space. For the United States, that would be a small increase. For the rest of the world, that would be a huge increase.
Right.
But I think that would be a tenfold increase for the UK.
Well, let me bounce some numbers off you and tell me whether this makes sense. I think we're pretty much through your article, so I want to ask you about some general ideas related to it. So Elon Musk has said, and I think Gwynne Shotwell has also said this, that ultimately the goal is to get to the point where we can deliver a human from Earth's surface to the Martian surface for about $200,000. I'm not sure whether that's the current version of Starship or that's a future larger version of Starship.
I think that's the current version. I think that's what they're intending.
I mean, I think, you know, it's $2 million to fuel. Well, it's $2 million to fuel Super Heavy and Starship.
No, it's he said it was $2 million, the marginal cost to launch.
Oh no, sorry. I think it's $900,000 for fuel. It's $2 million to the and then you've got to launch like 8 tankers to refill Starship.
I thought it was 6. I mean, they changed the plans. It might be.
There's you have to do some number of tanker launches to refuel. You get Starship. I was talking to Tim Dodd from Everyday Astronaut about this. He said the idea is you get Starship into a particular orbit that I think is outside the orbit of the International Space Station, and maybe it's an unusual orbit, so it's easier to escape the rest of Earth's gravity well.
Yeah. And
then you refuel in that orbit so that it's easier for the Starship to go from there full, and you take, maybe it's 100 people in Starship. I think Elon has talked about an 18-meter diameter Starship 2.0, which might lower costs further. But anyway, if you have $2 million a launch and it's, let's say 10 launches to get it, you know, between the launch and the tankers, so it's $20 million.
Yeah, that's between
and then you carry 100 people. I think that works up to $200,000 a person.
Yeah.
So I had this. This is my math. Tell me if I'm crazy. Elon's goal is 1 million people on Mars to create a self-sustaining colony. a million times 200,000 is $200 billion.
Yep.
Now, on top of getting the people there, you probably want to get some stuff there. So if on top of let's say if it's $200 billion to get the people there, let's say you throw in another $800 billion to get stuff there to make the colony viable, you're at $1 trillion. It sounds like a lot, so I don't have $1 trillion in my pocket,
Well,
but it doesn't really sound like that much when you think about global economics.
Yes, but I can't imagine the governments of the world writing Elon Musk a check for $1 trillion.
Could you imagine Elon Musk writing a check for $1 trillion?
Starlink would have to go really well for that.
Okay, so I'm guessing you don't follow my channel. So here's my theory. So I'll bounce some numbers off you. I think Elon owns about a quarter of Tesla. And I think Tesla will be easily a $10 trillion company and potentially a $20 or $50 trillion company.
Based off the battery tech?
Based off robo-taxis, self-driving cars. That's a long conversation. But I'm just giving you one example. If they deliver self-driving cars, Elon said at Autonomy Day that they expected to have a Tesla-owned fleet of 10 million vehicles. If 10 million vehicles generate $30,000 in profit a year each, which I just had a conversation with one of my Patreon supporters who said it's a lot more than that. But let's suppose it's $30,000 a year in profit each. That's $300 billion a year in profit. At a price earnings ratio of 30, that makes Tesla a $9 trillion company. And that doesn't include energy, Megapack, selling vehicles, just owning a fleet of 10 million vehicles. You could be talking about a $9 trillion company. And the price earnings ratio of 30 might be low.
That's insane.
So that's one. Starlink, I originally estimated 100 million customers paying $1,000 a year, which is $100 billion a year in revenue. And the cost, you go back to that point about the cost of the marginal cost of a launch being $2 million.
Yeah.
I expect Starship to launch 400 Starlink satellites per launch. This Falcon 9 does 60.
Yeah.
And I think Gwynne Shotwell has said they expect to do 400. So that's only $50,000 in launch cost, or is it $5,000 in launch cost? I think that's $5,000 in launch cost. Then it's whatever the cost of the satellite is. I struggle to come up with the expense of operating Starlink at more than $10 billion a year, and it's got $100 billion a year in revenue, if it's only 100 million customers paying $1,000 a year.
It does have some competitors though. I mean, you look at like Kuiper in principle.
But everybody else's launch costs are really high. Starlink is the only one that has low launch cost, and also they have a
see how someone could beat them at this point.
They also have a first mover advantage that once they get up and running, it's really hard. If you're going to be the second mover in the market, it would help to be lower cost, but the second mover is going to be higher cost because their launch costs are going to be higher. So now your customer acquisition cost as a second player, keep in mind they're competing with fiber, and for a lot of customers, I'm not going to buy a Starlink for my house. I have fiber at my house right now. I have 250 megabits per second down and 50 megabits up, and I pay, I don't know, $30 it's part of our homeowners association. I don't even really pay for it. So there's no way I'm doing it. So that's another story is Starlink. I see, anyway, I came up with a theory of 100 million customers. And like the day after I made the video where I talked about that, there was an article that there were 65 million customers in the United States alone for Starlink. 65 million customers willing to pay $1,000 a year for Starlink. So then you get to Europe, you get to China, China, you have to make some sort of censorship agreement with the government, but there's a large portion of the planet where there's a lot of people.
I'm not sure there'd be that many customers in Europe because most European countries are smaller and have better broadband infrastructure. Well,
the point is it doesn't have to be 50% of the population. It could be 5 or 10% of the population. And, where there's 7 or 8 billion people on the planet. So 10% of that, a lot of them can't afford it. But if it's 65 million in the US alone, you can see it's not hard to get over 100 million. And then if you lower the cost to $50 a month, let's say $500 a year, you may all of a sudden access a much larger market. I'm not clear what the dynamics are, but anyway, that's a huge amount of money. Then you've got Neuralink is absolutely, how many people are going to want to avoid Alzheimer's. Right.
No, I'm a bit skeptical he's going to get that far. I think that he's going to have a lot of. I think Neuralink will be successful with paralyzed people.
Well, we don't know how far it's going to go. Plain and simple, we don't know how far it's going to go.
I think it will. I think going back to the Mars subject, I think in terms of funding operations on Mars, I think the Mars operations will ramp into high gear long before you get the really crazy applications for Neuralink, where you can just like fix Alzheimer's. I think near term, it's going to be slow because you're implanting stuff in people's brains.
Right.
At the end of the day, this is a medical device and there's a slow approval process, and that's probably a good thing. But
sorry, I just need to ask the chat. Michael Fleming says your audio quality is terrible. You sound like you have a soft voice to me, but otherwise it sounds fine to me. I haven't seen, that's the first time I've seen a comment on that. It seems like everyone's doing fine, so I don't want you to worry about it yet. But if other people feel like the sound quality is terrible, let me know and we'll see. I don't think we can fix it.
Oh, this is unfortunately the only microphone I've got.
We're good.
I'll try and speak a bit clearer. I've moved a bit close to my mouth.
I think you're fine.
Hopefully that will be.
I think you're fine. I mean, maybe that I'm too loud rather than you're too soft. So, I mean, that's a fix, is I can turn down the gain on my microphone. So anyway, if anybody's having issues with that, let me know and I'll check the chat again in a second. So anyway, I think it's possible that Elon, just on Tesla alone, will have enough, if Tesla becomes a $10 trillion company, then Elon has $2.5 trillion in net worth. And then you've got Starlink, and then you've got Neuralink, and then you've got the Boring Company. There's a lot of, okay, I think that sounds like people can hear you. You're soft, wispy, or you sound like you have a cold. But otherwise, I think you're fine. So if you're going to do a lot of these interviews, you might want to get a new microphone.
Yeah, I should do.
For now, I would say don't worry about it. So I guess there's a question there. If governments won't fund this, and keep in mind, $1 trillion sounds like a lot of money, but if you spread it out over 20 years, it's $50 billion a year. That's not a big chunk. If my math is right,
it's about the defence budget of the UK, which is quite a chunk.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's, certainly, I could see, NASA has a budget. There are defense agencies that might decide they see some sort of value in going to Mars.
Well, what makes me sort of not a bit hesitant to agree with this is that when governments have that much money on the table,
they want control.
They're not that good at spending it wisely.
Right.
There's just too many. The amount of money governments have is crazy. The UK government, I think the size of it is about £1 trillion or thereabouts every year.
Yeah.
But because there's that much money in a democratic society, you've got to have everybody like chipping in and having their own say with what is done. There's got to be lots of oversight and all these different interests pulling on it. And to it'd be nice to say, well, this is something we like. Let's just write the check to Elon Musk and make it happen. But that's unreasonable to expect that to ever happen.
Well, I mean, I've thought, generally speaking, most people are not going to pay for a ride to Mars.
Well, some people will.
That's a hard trip. Let's talk about that for a second. This is actually, I think, possibly the biggest challenge to a Martian colony is I don't think I would go. And I should say this, I don't think I'm a useful person for the early Mars colony. I am a lawyer and a YouTuber and a real estate agent. I do a bunch of things, but I'm not an engineer. I'm not a hands-on guy. I'm also 55 years old.
I would say lawyers are good on Mars. I don't think it will take long for there to be a dispute over property or something.
Well, no, I think the idea is we want to get as many lawyers as possible to Mars so they're not polluting Earth. The more lawyers we send to Mars, the better off Earth is. I think that's one of the big arguments that might satisfy a lot of people. But I think you're right. At some point, there would be value in having lawyers on Mars. But I guess I was going to say, to me, in the early days, when you've got a colony of 1,000 people and you've got a colony of 10,000 people, it's really engineers, blue collar workers, people who can fix stuff, handymen, whatever. people who can make things work are going to be really, really valued, and medical staff to take care of the people who are there. Does that make sense?
Yes. The way I think it will go down is it will initially be sort of your typical astronaut types going. And one of the major hazards going on the way is going to be radiation. Now, basically there's about, depending on the solar cycle, between 500 and 900 millisieverts of cosmic radiation per year in deep space. The annual limits in the US are 50 millisieverts for radiation workers, and in the EU it's 20 millisieverts. I mean, I assume we can go with the US number because there's no evidence that it's causing problems. And you can't, it's very difficult to shield against this. You'd have to have about 10 meters of water to have the same level of shielding you would have on Earth.
Which is a lot of water, especially on a 9-meter diameter ship.
Yeah. So you've got to have to pick people for their low susceptibility to radiation, as well, specifically to radiation-induced cancers, which is the main risk. Now, one of the things that changes the risk is your age, and because if you get exposed to radiation, it causes cancer. It can have a very long latency, like 60 years maybe. Older people are lower risk because basically they'll die of something else first.
I'm a good candidate then.
Actually, yeah. I mean, if you don't have any like kids to look after at home,
they grew up.
Yeah, exactly. So generally, you're looking at sending people 35 and over to start with. To broaden this, you're going to have to start adding more shielding to spacecraft. So I think that the way SpaceX is proposing to get to Mars, I think this will evolve over time. I think there are what seem to be on paper obvious ways to make it cheaper and safer. So you said like you have to like have 10 Starship launchers to get 100 people to Mars. Well, so that's the most. So like 9 of those will be fuel.
Right.
If you could source your propellant from somewhere in space, you don't have to launch from the surface of the Earth. Now, whatever propellant operation you're running would require supplies from Earth, but you could maybe take that 9 Starships worth of fuel, of propellant, and replace it with 1 Starship or even less than 1 Starship worth of parts and people to maintain the fuel operation.
Yeah.
And there's also the current plan is you have the same Starship that you launch from the surface of the Earth on, you go across to Mars and you land on the same vehicle. This gets fueled up on the way. The problem is that you're launching your cabin and your supplies for the journey from the surface of the Earth every time you do this. And you don't necessarily have to do that. There's a thing called a cycler, which you can employ, which is there's a special type of orbit. There's kind of pings between Earth and Mars constantly. And you would build like a space station in this orbit. And you would then send your starships there. You would live on that for the crossing. I think it would take a bit longer than a regular one, but because this is you don't have to reboost the thing on a cycle orbit, it just keeps going round. Just has like small amounts of station keeping thrust. You can make it really massive for no penalty.
And you can then have your 10 meters of water.
Exactly.
So what about the other theory that I think the journey is considered to be about 6 months? Could you make the journey faster?
Yes.
I think you can get down to 3 months and that would reduce the radiation by half.
I think in the original presentation, Musk was talking about 4 months. Now that's a significant number because in deep space, the cosmic radiation is about 3 times what you would find in low Earth orbit. And we've had people live in low Earth orbit for a year. And they come back and they've been quite debilitated, but that's because of weightlessness.
Right.
So if the argument for 4 months is that that's just a year on the ISS worth of radiation compressed by a factor of 3. So hopefully you're not going to see anything untoward just going up that little bit of increase.
Could the cycler, is it an Aldrin cycler? Is that the right term?
Yeah, well, the Aldrin cycler is the one that does it every time, because there's a class of cyclers where they only come around every like 2-3 synodic cycles. The Aldrin cycler is the one that does it every synodic cycle.
So let's suppose whatever it is you do a cycler, could a cycler effectively be an O'Neill colony?
Yes, but it'd take a while to build it.
Right.
And so,
sorry for those people who don't know, an O'Neill colony is a very large object in space that is created by humans, unless it's created by some other species. That's probably hundreds of, like a kilometer long or even larger.
I think the baseline design is 32 kilometers long.
Right, so very, very large. That's a really large amount of mass that would have to be launched into space or obtained from somewhere in space. And almost might be easier to build that from Mars than build it from Earth.
Oh yeah, you would never build these things. I mean, even when O'Neill proposed them in the 70s, his idea was you would build what's called a mass driver on the surface of the moon, which is basically like it's a coil gun. So you just got a series of coils, accelerate something magnetically, and because there's no atmosphere, you can just go arbitrarily fast here. You don't have to worry about air resistance, and the escape velocity of the moon's just under 3 kilometers per second. So you can just ping payloads off constantly just with electricity.
So you're mining material from Mars and launching it into space to be constructed into
from the moon.
From the moon into space to be constructed into an O'Neill colony.
Yeah, that was the plan in the original book, The High Frontier.
And that would be easier than Mars because the moon has a much lower escape velocity than.
Yeah. Also, Mars does have some atmosphere, I think.
Yeah.
It doesn't have much atmosphere, but it might be enough to be problematic when you're going 5 kilometers per second along the ground.
Okay, so Jim Whitehead asked this question: how long for the trip in a cycler to Mars? Would it take longer?
I think it takes a bit longer. I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head. But just have the station you'd be able to build on a cycler orbit, it would have thick radiation shielding, and you'd also be able to make it very large and rotate to provide gravity. So,
and maybe instead of water, you'd use rum so that people would be able to enjoy the trip.
You could just use rocks as well. You could just find like asteroids and.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think you said that you kind of wanted to call for those who are watching, we agreed to do this interview for about an hour, and then I was going to continue the live stream afterwards, go to sort of my normal Sunday live stream, even though it's Saturday, because I'm not doing the live stream tomorrow. So I just wanted to see if you guys have questions for Peter, put the questions in the chat and I'll see if I can answer them. And then for my Patreon supporters, I'll look at your questions after Peter's done. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Peter?
Not really. Just sort of, I think we've covered most of the ground on the post I made about Mars.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to just read this quote from your article while I'm waiting to see if there's comments or questions. He wrote that Mars is a promising prospect for, I think the vision, I guess I want to say this, the vision isn't just to get to Mars.
No, that's the beginning.
And the vision isn't just to establish a self-sustaining colony on Mars. The vision is to become a spacefaring civilization.
Yeah.
A multi-planetary species, not just one, not just two, not a biplanetary species, but a multi-planet, and maybe beyond being a multi-planetary species, being a species that goes beyond merely living on planets, merely living on solid rocks. Jim Whitehead asks if you are a big fan of building an O'Neill colony over settling Mars. Is there a greater value in building an O'Neill colony rather than doing a colony on Mars?
I don't think it can be done before we do Mars. I think the attraction of Mars is it's basically the easiest place in the solar system to start this off. O'Neill colonies, they look quite difficult and complicated. We may start off with some smaller ones than these big cylinders. But The other thing is that when you've got a free floating colony, you've got no nearby resources. You have to import literally everything because you've got a spot in space.
You can't mine your O'Neill colony because it's stuff you put up there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with Starship we have the tool to get to Mars in the next decade easily, and we've got a fairly good idea of what we do when we land. This has been, there was a competition run by the Mars Society to design well, they did several competitions. They did one for like 1,000-person base and one for 1,000,000-person city, which I entered. So there's already been lots of ideas on what to do when we get to Mars. I mean, I would like to. I think I may live to see the construction of an O'Neill cylinder.
Okay. And you're how old?
40.
Okay, I'm 55, so it's a longer stretch for me. So actually, before I get to these questions, I had a question. I made a video a while back, which I made a key math error, but I think there's a couple of problems being on Mars. One problem is we don't know what effect living in 1/3 of Earth's gravity or 40% of Earth's gravity is going to be on the human body in the long term, and in particular, getting pregnant and gestating.
That's probably the biggest unknown. It's probably okay, but we don't know, and we need to do some experiments.
Right, we presumably do animal experiments first and see how the animals do.
Yeah, obviously, this could be done in Earth orbit, though.
Well, no, but that's zero. That's basically zero G. I'm saying
we could create a rotating system in low Earth orbit with Mars gravity, and this is, it's not. I mean, I'm kind of disappointed that space agencies haven't already done this because it's really not that hard.
Right.
They were doing experiments with artificial gravity and the Gemini missions in 1966, and they haven't really tried since.
Right.
I think
that's
there
an
may
interesting
have been
idea.
Centrifuges. There may have been some centrifuges on the ISS. I'm not sure.
So my idea was there's two problems. One problem is whether the gravity is going to have a long-term effect or interfere with gestation. The other problem is that there's radiation on the surface. And I had this idea that I thought was a potential solution, which is basically you send Boring Company tunneling machines to Mars.
Yeah. My city-state design that I put for the competition had some tunnels in it, which were Boring Company size. I didn't mention them by name, but
well, so my idea is a step further is that you design them so that they're in circles, and you have vehicle inside the tunnel going in the circle at the right velocity to create basically 1G. And then if it turns out that people are sensitive long-term to living in 0.38 Gs or whatever it is, then maybe you spend 16 hours a day in the tunnel going around experiencing 1G, and you get out it stops every 8 hours and people get out in shifts and they go out to the surface.
That would be a strange existence.
Yes. Well, anything on Mars is going to be a strange existence. Come on.
It doesn't have to. I mean, this idea that you have to live underground, kind of, but it's not going to be like people think of, just like going down in the mine shaft. Because Mars does have an atmosphere. It's very thin, but it's thick enough that when you have cosmic rays coming in from shallow angles, they still have to pass through quite a lot of atmosphere. So if they come down vertically, they have to pass through hardly any, and you get almost all the deep space dose from this direction. And obviously, you're standing on the surface of a planet, so that immediately halves your dose compared to deep space.
Yeah. Because half the planet's blocking the planet's blocking half of it, right?
But if it comes in from the horizon, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers because I looked into this for my design. But vertically, I think you're talking about on Earth in the vertical direction, in sort of zenith, there's about 1,000 grams per square centimeter of shielding. That does most of the work stopping the cosmic rays. The Earth's magnetic fields stops about a third of them, but the rest is you obviously got half on Earth as well from the surface. But it's mostly the atmosphere, and it's about 1,000 grams per square centimeter at zenith. The location on Mars I was looking at was about 26 grams per square centimeter.
Well, I guess I was saying, I got to sleep somewhere anyway. Do I really care whether I'm sleeping in a moving tunnel or in a moving vehicle in a tunnel or sleeping on the surface?
I actually have my design on my blog, so you could have a look at it. But if you come in from the shallow angles on the horizon, I think you're about 400 grams per square centimeter of shielding in that direction, which is roughly the same as you get on Earth at zenith when you're in a plane.
Okay.
So what you can build, and me and some of the other people in this competition have also done this, is you put all your shielding on the roof, because you've got a shield down to about most of the radiation comes in sort of a cone that's about 60, 70 degrees wide. If you shield that really heavily with a big heavy roof, you can let natural light in the sides, so it's not going to feel like living underground.
Right. I'm just throwing out, it's a combination of radiation and exposure. And, if you're going to be going back to Earth at some point, it might be good to be regularly exposed to 1G.
Possibly, yes. I mean, there may be sort of medical ways around this. I think long term, though, if it really is bad for you, if we can't live and reproduce in 0.38 gravity, we may have to just use Mars as kind of like a staging area and try and go straight to O'Neill cylinders.
Okay, so let me hit some questions before you have to go. Erie asks the question everybody gets asked: do you want to go to Mars?
If you'd asked me 20 years ago, I'd have said definitely yes. Okay. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I have a family. I can't take my children are 5 and 7. I can't take them to Mars.
Right. Well, no, but so you're 15 years from now, your kids are grown.
My youngest son has special needs and is likely to require care for the rest of his life. So personally, my chances of going are fairly low.
Okay. So Digital Foods asks, cyclers are said to be less efficient with cargo Earth to Mars. Have you heard anything like that? Is there an efficiency issue with cyclers?
It's true. If you've got cargo that's not sensitive to radiation, you just send it normally. The thing is that some of the things you're going to have to take with you are basically your habitat, like your radiation shielding, your big gravity wheel. That's the savings from the cycler, and it is mostly for people. It's quite right, to go on a cycler orbit between Earth and Mars with cargo, there's not much point, apart from the cargo you're going to need on the way.
Okay. Do you think we're going to need to grow food on the way? This is from Mark, one of our moderators.
Yes, I would imagine so. I mean, to build a big space station, I mean, you wouldn't want to have to constantly send food up to this thing. So it would have to be relatively self-sufficient for this to work out.
Okay. And there's a question from Digital Foods again. Is there an optimal cycle? Is there a cycler system that you're particularly fond of that people would read up on?
The Aldrin cyclers are the one you want to use, because that comes around every synodic cycle.
Okay.
So it's named after Buzz Aldrin.
Here's a good question. I haven't thought of this. Are there energy sources on Mars other than solar? Like, is there the equivalent of geothermal or some other energy sources? I'm not sure
geothermal is very viable, but the wind turbines do work.
Okay, so there's possible wind energy.
And there's probably the possibility of nuclear energy.
Right, of course.
But I think setting up a nuclear fuel cycle on Mars I think there's quite a few industrial steps you have to do before you get to even thinking about that.
Okay. Charlie asks, do you think an O'Neill colony would actually be a good place to live compared to Earth? I have an answer, but I'll let you answer first.
I think it would, because you could create a perfectly controlled environment. You wouldn't. That'd essentially be zero pollution permanently, because, well, even if you did have to have some industry there, anything it didn't want, it could just dump over the side. It doesn't have to sort of bring it back into the biosphere that you want to, like, have your kids playing around in.
It's okay to pollute space because space is so big, it's absurd.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Glenn asks, is it necessary to make orbit before going completely out of Earth gravity? I think this is a orbital mechanics thing that's hard for people to. You can't just go straight up, right?
Well, if you went straight up with enough velocity, you would then exit the Earth. But the thing is, orbit describes sort of a lot of situations. So you can have a hyperbolic orbit, which is one where you're leaving. So you will technically be in orbit as you fly up. So yes, you could fly directly up with a very large velocity and you would leave Earth, and that would be considered a type of orbit.
Okay. I guess that's sort of like almost like a semantic question. What do you think? I think you have it in your article. What do you think about a Venus colony?
I'm not generally in favor, because the place you'd have to colonize is the cloud tops. Basically, at 50 kilometers altitude, the temperature and pressure are bearable.
This is Sanjay's question: was any hope of a floating Venus colony?
The fact that oxygen, nitrogen, breathing air is a lifting gas on Venus means essentially you'd live inside the gas bags of a giant blimp. The problem with this is that you're just sitting there in a cloud. There's no like minerals around to mine. There's no sort of ice to dig up. You've got no material resources.
There's no advantage to that over just being in space then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and there's a massive disadvantage that you are most of the way down a massive gravity well that's almost as big as Earth's.
Okay. And so somebody asked about floating a city on Saturn. It's the same basic problem with an even bigger gravity well.
Yes, and it's colder, and the winds are ridiculously powerful.
What are your thoughts on terraforming Mars?
I'm not sure it's terraforming the whole planet. It would be a very long way off, and it's not necessary to have large number of people living there to terraform it, because you can you could build very large structures on Mars, because when you're building things on Earth, you're always worried about like the compressive loads. When you're building on Mars, because everything's full of air, which is an atmosphere pressure higher than the outside, you're actually more building things under tension. And it's actually more of a problem to stop the buildings ripping themselves off the ground than it is to sort of stop them collapsing down on themselves.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, when you see pictures of domes on Mars, that's not really that practical, because you can't build a dome that big before the tension around the edges becomes too difficult to handle for most materials.
Okay, and just to be clear, although there's wind on Mars, it's not likely to knock a person over.
No, it would never knock a person over. It's high speed, but it's got no like force behind it.
Okay, because it's Mars atmosphere is 1% of Earth's atmosphere, so it's like if you have like the strongest wind on Earth hitting you, it feels like 1/10 of that. Like you in the middle of an Earth, at the velocity was the same as the strongest hurricane, it would feel like a 15-mile-an-hour wind, not a 150-mile-an-hour wind. No, sorry, a 1.5-mile-an-hour wind, because it's 1%. So it's not that bad. So, what was this? I don't know if I want to go to this one. What do you think about the UFO sightings? Do you think there's is that meaningful?
I don't think they're aliens. I think aliens almost certainly exist. I don't think they're in the solar system.
Okay. All right, let me see. Do you think lead line clothes would make a difference for radiation?
No. I can explain why.
Yes, please.
Well, there's two types of radiation you're dealing with in space. There's solar protons and galactic cosmic rays. Solar protons, if you have a solar proton event, you can have a very large number of them, but they're not that high energy and you can shield against them. Now, cosmic rays, they're just really, really high energy, and they will penetrate lots of material. And what tends to happen is when they impact like the outside of your spacecraft, they produce what's called secondary radiation. You imagine if you look at pictures where they have the detectors in the Large Hadron Collider, they have like the particle beam that comes in, and then there's this like shower of particles from the collision, something like that happens. And it's more likely to happen, it will happen worse if it strikes an element that's higher on the periodic table. So lead is really bad for shielding. What you want is something like hydrogen, like water, like polythene.
Polyethylene?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a good way of packing lots of hydrogen into a solid. One of the issues that I think is not optimal with Starship is that it's got a steel hull. So iron is going to, I think, a thin sheet of steel. It may literally be worse than nothing for radiation shielding. You might actually get more radiation being behind that than if you were in open space.
I have a personal, it's only loosely related, but for those who follow my channel, I've been trying to build a doghouse to shield out thunder and fireworks, so that my dog will have a quiet place to go. Like I basically built a box inside the house, and the idea would be the dog would go in there during a thunderstorm or fireworks, and the dog would be more comfortable. And I put this microphone inside, and ultimately I used my iPhone microphone because the microphone didn't really. Well, I tested with both, and the low frequency sounds, the bass sounds, were actually louder inside the box. Like it did shield the higher frequency sounds fairly well, reduce them 10 decibels, but it increased somehow it increased the lower frequency sounds like 5 decibels. Like, well, that didn't work. And there's something like mass loaded vinyl that I should probably try using that instead. I used cork and I used sound foam. And I think that stuff is good for some things, but it's not good for, you basically need a lot of mass to affect those sound waves. So we're 5 minutes over the time you had in mind. Are you okay? Can we go a little further?
Yeah, we can carry on. We can carry on for a bit.
Okay. I don't understand. Matt Burns said, will they need to work out 2 hours a day? I guess
for the gravity.
Yeah, I mean, that was my thought about the loop. If you just have this loop that you're traveling, you sleep on the loop, then you're getting the experience of 1G at least 8 hours a day, let's say. Would that prep you better? Do we know enough about the human reaction to low gravity to know how that would work?
Basically, we've studied zero gravity, and we know what happens in 1 gravity, and we don't know much between, because the Apollo astronauts were not on the surface of the moon long enough to really see any effects we could measure.
Right.
So this is something that really needs to be filled in, and can be filled in low Earth orbit by building a rotating space station.
How big would that have to be?
Well, for just the general public to be comfortable in, it would probably need a radius of about 100 meters or more.
I saw a design where you take 2 starships and you tether them with something so that, because I feel like starships are real like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the volume of a starship, the usable payload of a starship volume, is not that far off the volume of the International Space Station.
That sounds about right. It's huge. But you can probably make a small diameter with like people who are selected to be tolerant of it.
No, but but if you take 2 starships and you put them end to end, like standing, the noses are out. Maybe you'd want to have the noses in, actually, I think. And then you just have some kind of tether between them.
You could do that.
Some sort of lattice. It would obviously have to be very strong to keep those masses from spinning apart.
Well, I suppose they've got the crane attachments on top to be lifted up, so I imagine they could take the load quite happily. I think the long term, I imagine in the near term they'll just take the hit of weightlessness for the journey.
Right.
Like as I said, I think the long term, what you'll see is Starship is going to sort of. I think the design will branch out into different versions. The Starship as is presently designed, as far as I can tell, and I'm a physicist, I'm not an engineer, but it looks to me like it's a Mars lander that is just got so much capability that it can be kind of pressed into service to do other stuff. It's not particularly well optimized for going through.
For being a space station.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think it's particularly well optimized for landing on if you want to safely bring astronauts back to Earth, you probably want wings.
Yeah. Actually, I just had this thought because we were talking earlier about you have the Starship in a certain orbit getting ready to go to Mars. Would it help if you, let's suppose you decided this Starship's not going to land on Earth again?
Yeah.
Would it help if you removed the sea level optimized engines? While it's in orbit, you remove those and you just saved, I don't know, 4.5 tons by taking off 3 engines. And, and maybe you could even go to 2. Maybe you could even go down to 2 vacuum optimized engines. And, you know, I think Elon has said, sorry. So does that make sense, first of all, before I go into depth?
Kind of, but then you get to the problem of what you're going to do when you get to Mars.
Right, but you don't need sea level optimized engines when you get to Mars.
No, no.
They're not going to. They're going to be relatively useless. You're going to want to have back. The plan right now is
I'm not sure if because he was doing something weird where he's like using a combination of them. I can't remember exactly what the engine use on landing was.
It's 3 sea level optimized and 3 vacuum optimized in the current design. So I'm just saying, you take the 3 sea level optimized engines off, you've just saved 4.5 tons. That helps with the rocket equation.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I don't know if you've heard Elon talk about this. He talked about reducing the size of the payload and stretching the tanks. And actually, I was going to say further with that, I don't know if you need the fins or as large fins to land in the Martian atmosphere.
I think you need them. I think the fins are mainly designed to land in the Martian atmosphere.
Okay, so you need those.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think if it was designed to be, if there was a version designed just to land on Earth, I think you'd be better off with like a sort of spatial style delta wing or something, because the landing procedure at the moment, if you imagine one of the intentions is to use this as a passenger point-to-point transport, this thing has to come in, it has to relight its engines within seconds of like plowing into the ground at 100 miles an hour, and that they just have to work, otherwise everyone dies.
Right. And that's bad.
If you've got wings, you're coming in, like maybe the landing gear doesn't lock down, but you've maybe got a couple of seconds to debug that. And even if it doesn't, you can still land potentially without killing everybody.
Yeah. Do you think Charlie asked this question, what do you think about the Blue Origin second moon lander system? I guess I would ask number one that, and number 2, what do you think about focusing on the moon first and Mars later? Sorry, please address the Blue Origin question first.
Well, it would be nice if they built a moon lander, but Blue Origin they seem to have got all the right ingredients. They have this like amazing CAO who's obviously very good, because we've seen what he's done with Amazon and AWS. They've had a bottomless pit of money, and they've had 20 years. Yeah. So I'm just like, where are the rockets?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, Jeff Bezos has now quit Amazon. He's going to go full time at Blue Origin.
Maybe.
Well, that's what he's suggesting. I would hope that he gets in there and he starts knocking some heads together, because there's a lot of potential there. But at the moment, they just can't see SpaceX. SpaceX are just...
All right. So what about the larger idea of let's do the moon first and Mars later? And moon is a lot easier.
Well, the moon has the advantage that you're only a couple of days away if something goes wrong. So the moon is what NASA wants to do, and that means that there'll be contracts in it for SpaceX and for others. I don't think this idea of like you've got to pick moon or Mars, it doesn't actually make that much sense anymore, because it sort of originated when it was just NASA was the only game in town. They had a program, and people who wanted moon or Mars had to fight each other to try and get control of that program. So, but these days, you've got multiple actors going to go in multiple directions, and especially with SpaceX, because their moon landers derived from Starship, which is a Mars lander, then it's not really going to derail their Mars program at all. They're just going to get some extra money, make a modification to the Mars lander, and it's actually going to make it more likely they'll get to Mars sooner. So it's no longer a zero-sum game.
Okay. Paul, by the way, Paulus Plain sent in a super chat. He said, when I hear your English accent, I want to have an English pub food beer. P.S. I love from a half Norwegian, quarter English, quarter Scottish. Love from Norway. Take. So.
Yeah, I would like to be able to sit in a pub again.
So. What was? There was another question in there, and I know I've lost it. Oh, there was a question about terraforming Mars. My impression of your answer is you don't think terraforming Mars is all that important.
Not really. You can just essentially build large pressurized structures, like really big, like almost city-sized. You can sort of like cover over craters and things.
Okay.
It would be very difficult for a number of reasons. Like the discovery of perchlorates, it's not really a problem for colonists because they're fairly trivial to keep out. But if you want to terraform the entire planet where you can just walk around and you can grow crops anywhere, then you're going to have a strategy to deal with them planet-wide. And there's also the question of finding a gas balance which is breathable and which traps enough air, enough heat from the greenhouse effect. So obviously, if you had like a dense carbon dioxide atmosphere, you'd be warm with the planet. It'd be great. But as soon as you take your mask off, you're going to pass out and die because it's carbon dioxide. It's poisonous.
And that would be bad.
That's bad, yeah. And you could get to the point where you're above the Armstrong limit, where you don't need a pressure anymore. You just need a mask to give you oxygen. That's probably doable and maybe worthwhile.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something we have to think about at the moment because terraforming is something you do when you're getting towards being a Kardashev 2 civilization.
Okay. So Erie asks, I don't know how to pronounce it, but IRRI asks, will inner ear problems arise from a rotating station and such from the Corelli effect and maybe the Coriolis effect? I think the point is that if you go over 100 meters of radius, that problem goes down.
It goes down, yeah, significantly. I mean, O'Neill's designs, I think the radius of the basic one had a diameter of 8 kilometers, I think, huge.
Right. And that makes the Coriolis effect really, really small.
Yeah. And also, they did some tests with people in like rotating sort of harnesses on Earth, and they found that you can adapt to Coriolis effects in the inner air.
Okay. Charlie asks, will we be towing asteroids back to Earth orbit for mining? I think I did a video on this where I said it was not a good idea, but what's your thoughts?
I'm not sure. I'm going to do a blog post on this.
Okay.
I think. The trick is to capture them because when they come in, they have a lot of velocity. And you need to basically sort of slow them down into Earth orbit. So it might be the case that you would rather mine asteroids or mine the moon than send the sort of the refined material back to Earth, because then you're not slowing down a lot of useless matter.
Yeah. Sorry. I had this view that mining asteroids or mining Mars or mining the moon is very, very useful for material in space or on the moon or Mars, and not nearly as useful on Earth because we already have a lot of stuff on Earth and it's not that hard to get stuff out of the Earth. If we found some great mineral in space that we didn't have a lot of on Earth, that would be really valuable. But otherwise, I don't know how important it is.
Well, there are, because when a planet forms, like the heavy elements tend to sink, and so there is quite a lot of things like gold and platinum in asteroids.
Yeah.
But the argument is always like, well, you get one asteroid that's like got thousands and thousands of tons of platinum, and you bring it back, the price of platinum is going to go down quite a lot.
Right.
But someone's actually made a counter argument to this that we don't have like industrial uses for very expensive metals.
Right.
And if like platinum and gold were the price of copper, maybe we'd find like uses for them.
Okay.
And then the price would go up again.
Okay. Because my take on it was you could probably only fit about 100 tons of whatever material you want on a Starship.
Mm.
That's the payload capacity normally. I mean, maybe you could fit more, but structurally, I don't know if the ship could handle having more than 100 tons.
If you just want to return metals, you can build sort of very simple re-entry capsules.
Right.
I mean, they don't.
You could have them land in the ocean and just pick them up.
I'd land them on land because if you've got like 100 tons of gold, it'll just sink.
Well, you land them I was just saying you drop them in a shallow part of the ocean, not a deep part of the ocean. You land them, half a mile offshore or 100-mile offshore somewhere that's not populated, but shallow water. That might be better than, because then you get the value of the water absorbing the energy.
Go back to your original point. Yes, I think you're right that most of the mining in space is to save you the trouble of putting stuff up into space.
Right.
You mentioned earlier the Starship, as it's conceived, has about a cost of about $100,000 to $200,000 per person to Mars. If you were to sort of fill a Starship with like economy class seating, Musk has claimed like 1,000 people in it. 500 maybe more realistic, if you need to actually be able to sort of efficiently load them and unload them and keep them safe. But even if you put 500 people on a Starship at $2 million a flight, that's $4,000 per ticket.
Right.
And like people pay that for like first class on long haul flights.
Right. But I don't think it would be comfortable to have 500 people on a Starship for a trip to Mars.
No, this is where the cycler comes in.
Okay.
So what I think it would look like in sort of a future journey, once you've got the Starship established going back and forth for a few cycles and you start to build things, you would fly for like a few $1,000s, probably less than $10,000, to a space station in Earth orbit. You'd then transfer to another Starship, which would have fuel that would mine in space, and this would take you to the cycler. And this would be another short trip, maybe probably less than 24 hours, I think, where you'd be like basically be in economy class seating again, and then you'd be able to stretch your legs on the cycler until that got to Mars, and then another Starship at the other end takes you down.
Right.
So you would, the sort of expensive, the only thing you want to be moving around is yourself and your like personal luggage. You don't want to, you might have you'd probably have a service where you'd be able to like order from a catalog in advance, like what you would have for check-in luggage, but you wouldn't, to avoid sending it up through the gravity well, you'd basically order a bunch of stuff that could be manufactured in space.
Okay.
Like all your clothes and stuff and your toiletries.
But you're basically saying if we build an Aldrin cycler, we maybe get the cost of getting people to Mars down from $200,000 in the dream scenario of Starship to maybe $20,000 a person or less.
I think maybe $10,000 is possible,
and that makes it a lot easier to get 1 million people to Mars.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something I've been doing the numbers on. This is going to be
how much would it cost to build the Aldrin cycler and get it running? Or would you build it? I think you were saying you'd build it in Mars.
Well, you'd build it. You could build it in Mars orbit or Earth orbit. You'd want to build it mostly in one piece and then take it out there using Starships probably. Because if you take a fully fueled up Starship with no payload, the amount it can tow is like thousands of tons.
Right.
I'm not sure to the cycle trajectory, but you would basically build a very large space station somewhere, not in a low Earth orbit, but somewhere near Earth where you could go to and from it very quickly while you're building it, and then you get a bunch of Starships, and then you tow it out to the cycler orbit.
How much delta V does the cycler need to get going?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Let me ask you this question.
5, 6.
This is a question from Evertoaster as a super chat. Do you think Tesla will provide the solar panels for Mars? Probably. Personally, I don't think it matters with it. I think we can get them from China cheaper, but what do you think about that?
I imagine that Musk will want to use his own company, so yeah, there'll be Teslas.
Okay. All right. So we're now 20 minutes over your time. How are you doing?
Okay. Fine. I mean, we can stay to 1/2 past.
Okay. So Philip asks, oxygen, water, or food, what would be the biggest challenge on Mars?
food, I think. They had this thing called Biosphere 2 in the early 90s where they tried to like lock a bunch of people together in a sealed biosphere in the Arizona desert. And it was famous because they had problems with oxygen. But I always felt this sort of they set up the experiment wrong because you don't have to be that like pure about getting your oxygen from plants. You can just manufacture through an industrial process and pump it into your habitat if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, it's not that difficult to make oxygen. I think if you've got energy sorted, oxygen and water are fairly straightforward.
Mm.
Food, I think, is going to be the challenge. And I think the first landings, they're just going to take all the food they could possibly eat. It's not going to be like the Martian where he's sort of scrabbling around. They're just going to have like landed starships with like hundreds of tons of food in them.
Right.
Until they can get the growing going.
Do you think that when humans get to Mars and really start to build a colony or whatever, do you think that they will either find existing life on Mars or evidence that there was life on Mars before?
I think fossil life is more likely.
I mean, is it conceivable that some sort of bacterial life that's existing now?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it'd probably have to be underground because the surface is bathed in fairly harsh UV.
Okay.
If I was to bet, if I was to look for life in the solar system, I would really look in the moons of Jupiter, where you have these tidally heated moons. They're covered on ice on the outside, but the heat from the interior it keeps a liquid ocean underneath them.
Are there particular moons you're thinking of?
Europa and Ganymede.
Okay. I know Ganymede from the TV show The Expanse.
Well, there's there's quite a few moons of gas giants where you have likely liquid oceans underneath the ice. Okay. And they're great places to look for life, but very hard to get to because the ice can be like 100 kilometers thick.
Are you familiar with Memphis Meats, Beyond Foods, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods? Are you familiar with those ideas?
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, my gut is that lab-based meat is going to be the future for nutrition on Mars? That the Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods approach of growing, let's say, pea proteins, and then basically using industrial process to convert that to meat, that's probably a lot more resource intensive than the lab-based meat idea. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think either of them can work. I mean, I like to have a steak every Friday night, but I can kind of see where the wind is blowing on this topic, and I imagine all my grandchildren will be vegans. Right. I don't think that there's going to be much meat eating on Mars.
Well,
what
I think part of the story there is that vegan is going to require producing vegetation. And I wonder if lab-based meat might actually end up being a more efficient way of producing nutrition than I think we don't know the potential of that process. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, you still have to feed the lab-based meat stuff, and I think that's I'm not familiar with the process, but I think that what you feed is still derived from plants.
Okay, so you still have to grow plants to make it work, and ultimately, vegan is going to end up being a more efficient way to produce food.
Yeah, it already is. I mean, it's simply that you're taking from a higher trophic level when you eat meat, because instead of just eating the plant, the animal's eating the plant. It's spending some energy, it's building some parts of its body that you don't eat, and then if you look at the use of agricultural land, beef is one of the top ones.
Okay. That was weird. On YouTube, you looked green for a second. You never looked green for me. Not you, like the whole screen looked green for a second. No, I don't think there's anything you need to worry about. Oh, here it is. John Jacob says, we need to concentrate on fixing Earth first. We're approaching the tipping point very, very quickly. There was a question earlier. What do you think about the Great Filter? Maybe you could tell people what it is first.
Well, this comes from a thing called the Fermi Paradox, which is Enrico Fermi basically was talking to some of the physicists one day and just said, well, we think there's aliens everywhere, or the galaxy appears to be full of like stars that could host life. So where are the aliens? They should be here. So the idea is that it would take maybe less than 1 million years for a technological civilization to colonize the entire galaxy. And the galaxy's been around for billions of years. So the chances are that something evolved before us and would have colonized the galaxy. So the fact they're not here suggests something happens to intelligent civilizations. They might not get to intelligence. The great filter might be that life is really rare. It might be that intelligent life is rare. It might be that technological civilizations are rare. You just get like hunter-gatherers all over the place. It might be that technological civilizations destroy themselves, like they discover nuclear fission and then they're no more. And various things like this have been proposed. I actually have a blog post on this. Because I have my model I call the flash in the pan hypothesis. This is if you have a society that's growing economically, it has some kind of compounding exponential growth of its energy consumption. It might not be high like 1 or 2%, but it's exponential. If it can expand at a certain speed, even if we assume that's the speed of light, which is the absolute maximum speed, then it's going to acquire access to new energy sources, i.e. new stars, at a cubic rate, because of that, if there's a uniform density of stars. So eventually the exponential always beats the cubic. It's mathematically inevitable. And if you look at some reasonable numbers for the Milky Way, this happens within 1,000 light years. So this makes the Fermi Paradox a little simpler, because your expansion basically hits a buffer at a certain point. And without sort of speculating about alien civilizations, you can't say exactly what happens then. Maybe it collapses, maybe it just sort of goes into like a quiescent state where they like check their own growth. Maybe they go to sleep and just wait for the motion of the stars of the galaxy to sort of spread them out more evenly so they can start expanding again. But that's my take on why. So with that, you don't need a great filter to explain why we don't see extraterrestrial life here.
Okay, I'm going to have to watch this part of the video again so I understand what you said, because I think either you went too fast or I got distracted. But I'm not going to dig in. It's probably me. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about meat and vegetables in the chat, but we are at your hour and a half now. So
yeah, I think I should be signing off soon.
So I'm gonna let you go. I want to thank you so much. I don't see any questions that are a good fit. So I want to thank you very much for coming on. For those who are watching, I'm going to continue on. I'm going to do my my own Q&A and talk about some Tesla, SpaceX news and so on. So I want to thank you, Peter Hague, for coming on. For those who don't know Peter, he has a blog called Planetocracy. There's a link to it in the description below, planetocracy.substack.com. I'm wearing my Mars landing t-shirt in commemoration, or because of this, Mars landing Starship, I should say, t-shirt. There's a link to that in the description below. I guess really quick, why would people want to read your blog?
Because I talk about interesting space stuff, and I'm trying to sort of figure out what the sort of scientific case for doing this, and then I'm also hopefully going to be talking about the business cases for it as well. Oh. Because I think there's been a lack of response to Starship. I mean, there's not enough people reacting how I think they ought to a Saturn V class rocket that costs $2 million a launch. Okay,
I've got to ask you this then, because I just had this conversation today or yesterday. Do you feel like most of the people in our daily, not people that we interact with online or people you interact with in your academic circles maybe, but just sort of the people that we interact with in our daily lives, you're walking down the street, you're walking our dog, you're talking to your neighbor, something like that. it feels like there's like 99% of the population has no idea what's happening.
That's the problem.
They just like with electric vehicles, I feel this way with the future of self-driving cars, with the Boring Company tunnels, with potentially plant-based meat or lab-based meat. I feel like there's so much radical change going on with technology, and so few people are actually looking at this and saying, excuse my French, but holy shit.
Yeah.
There's some really cool stuff happening.
I mean, people are noticing EVs. I've got one. My brother's got one. My brother-in-law's got a Tesla. Well, I think the rocket thing, I don't think people understand what Starship is going to do and how it's going to change everything.
Yeah.
And
I don't think
hopefully
people
in a year or two they will.
I mean, just the first booster land, like when that first Falcon 9 rocket booster landed successfully, like I watched that video probably once or twice a month, and I cry every time. Like, to me, it's such a momentous event that the potential for use, and when I want to say when Starship successfully performs an orbital launch and landing, like I feel like people just have no grasp of how big that is.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. Like I rode in the Boring Company tunnels in Las Vegas, and I see like it's going to radically change transportation on the planet. Just like it was so much better than Uber, Lyft, taxis, buses, trains, and it's coming, and it's going to be amazing. And even people in my Tesla community don't see it. Even some of the people, they don't quite see it the same way. I feel like there's so many different things happening so fast that there's a blogger, Tim Urban, his blog is Wait But Why.
I think I've seen that, yes.
He has some brilliant pieces about how fast things are changing, and we're just not evolved to appreciate how fast these changes happen.
Yeah, I'll be covering the rocket stuff on my blog, hopefully.
Yeah. So again, planetocracy.substack.com. Please check out Peter's blog. Subscribe if you can. Anything else you want to say, Peter, before I let you go? And folks,
no.
I'm going to continue.
No, that's all done, I think.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so everybody, please appreciate Peter. Check out his blog, and I'm going to start going ahead with the rest of my show, if we can call it a show. Thank you, Peter.
Good night.
I guess I want to go forward and talk a little bit. I've got a couple things I want to do. Let me go first to my Patreon Q&A. I want to thank everyone for watching, and you know, I'm going to keep going. So I wanted to do a Q&A about other things, and let me just see. Sorry. Okay. So John McBurney asked if there was we're going to talk about Tesla for a second now, and I should make a note of the time. It's 4:36. Okay, so John McBurney asked if there's a difference between the GigaPress, and by the way, this is a Patreon Q&A. I have Patreon supporters. You can check out Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Patreon supporters get to ask questions in advance of the live streams. John asks, is there a difference between the GigaPress and the casting machine? I hear both terms, and I'm not sure if they're the same. So I would say there are many casting machines, and there are actually more than one GigaPress. When used in the context of Tesla, the GigaPress, I think there's actually going to be more than one, is a machine that casts large parts. So you can cast small parts and you can cast large parts. The GigaPress, the idea is you're casting a very large part, and Cybertruck's GigaPress is going to be even bigger and cast even larger parts. So Dave Elliott asks, what if the $25,000 car, this is the car that was mentioned at Battery Day, is just a massively iterated version of a Model Y or Model 3, one that so many manufacturing processes have been optimized on? I can totally see a vehicle under a sheet at the unveiling, and when lifted, the shocked Pikachu faces in the crowd when it's a Model 3. So no, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that there's a lot of learning from making Model S, Model S Plaid, Model 3, Model Y. I think that they've learned to make things better, and what that leads to is you figure out how to design things better to make them easier to manufacture. So it's possible that the shape will be close to a Model 3 because aerodynamics matters, and you know the aerodynamics of the Model S is pretty compelling. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a vehicle that looks a lot like the Model S but smaller. because the Model S is so aerodynamic. I think we're going to see single piece casting of the entire chassis basically, plus a structural pack maybe. I'm not as sure about the structural pack because they're saying it's going to use lithium iron phosphate batteries, which in prismatic form don't work with a structural pack as far as I know. I actually think that the $25,000 vehicle is actually a representation of multiple vehicles. There's going to be a small hatchback for robotaxi passenger rides. There's going to be a little minivan for cargo. There's going to be a variety of things. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of things that come together. Rob asks, I'm wondering if you've seen the recent updates by Peter Rawlinson. This is about Lucid Motors. For those who don't know this, I am a critic of Lucid Motors. I think Lucid Motors, which purports to be making let me take this off. I don't need the headphones anymore. The headphones are for when somebody else is speaking. I don't think that Lucid Motors is for real. Lucid Motors is planning to produce a vehicle, or claiming to produce a vehicle called the Lucid Air, which is roughly a Mercedes S-Class or Tesla Model S competitor. So the question from Rob is wondering if I've seen recent updates. They seem even stranger to me than usual because he doesn't say anything specific. The closer you get to a deadline, the more specific the information he provides should be. Do I have any insight on what might be going on? There's a rumor that they're running out of money. I heard that from Whole Mars blog. I'm not sure where he got that from. It's only a rumor. I'm not saying it's true. They are waiting for their SPAC merger to go through. That's a merger with a SPAC called the Churchill Capital. When that goes through, they're going to have a lot more cash if it goes through. I think it's possible that the people behind the SPAC will decide it's not a good investment. So there's a whole bunch of things there. I've seen some of the updates and I haven't seen a lot of substance. So I think the question is, and I feel like journalists don't ask the right questions. There was a journalist who asked some good questions about the 20,000 vehicles in 2022, and he whiffed on that question. He did really badly on that question. But I think he will frequently say something like, we're going to release the car when we get it right. And no one asks the question, well, what's not right yet? What is it? Because people pick on Elon Musk for not delivering on FSD, and it's just another 2 weeks, or probably 2 weeks, or now it's hopefully 1 week. I think at some level, somebody should ask him, okay, you keep saying you got to get it right. Well, what's not right yet? You've been telling us for all along how great the vehicle is. What's not right? So, but no, I don't have any new insight. I had an interview fairly recently with a guy who does flyovers of the Lucid factory, and he believes in it. I don't. I haven't seen anything to make me believe in it yet. I think it's not credible. So, an interesting name from one of my Patreon supporters talked about Piper Sandler's projection of Tesla being the number 2 automaker by 2030. I don't know if there's really a question in this one name. So I didn't really see a question here, so I'm not going to do that. So let's see what Ken asks. Ford Lightning looks good. Will it bankrupt Ford? That's a really good question. My view of the Ford F-150 Lightning is that it is, and we're moving on now to the regular Q&A on the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit shortly about Tesla, what's news with Tesla, what's news with SpaceX, but let's get these questions out of the way first. I think the F-150 Lightning is going to cost Ford, when you include the R&D to come up with a vehicle, unless they produce it at scale. In other words, if they only produce 50,000 a year, it's going to cost them $100,000 a vehicle, and they're going to sell it for $50,000, and they're going to lose money. And it's sort of like the more they make, it's not clear at what point they have to get to where they actually make money on this vehicle. And I do think it has the potential. I think their EV production does have the potential to bankrupt Ford. And nobody asked this in the chat, but I guess this is a news item. It appears that the Biden tax credit for EVs is not going to happen. It's not in the reconciliation bill. I am not surprised by this. I think people misunderstand. People thought this was going to be a big help to Ford and General Motors. And I think the reality is that Tesla would get much more out of an EV credit than anyone else. And they haven't found a way to structure an EV credit that doesn't benefit Tesla more than its competitors. And they don't want Tesla to win. So, and I don't think Tesla needs it. I don't think Tesla needs the credit to be successful. It would make them more profitable, but they don't need it. Brian says, if the Cybertruck is the evolution of a better design, why would we go back? So I had a conversation. I'm actually pleased to report that I was at the Tesla Plaid event, and I got to talk to Franz von Holzhausen, and I actually asked him whether there would be other cyber vehicles. You know, I thought there were huge advantages in the manufacturing for Cybertruck, and he said it's not. He said it's a different manufacturing process. It has advantages, but the main advantage of Cybertruck is that the stainless steel design is really good for pickup trucks, for work vehicles and off-road vehicles. My impression is that although it has some advantages as a manufacturing process, it may not be that much better. Like, current automotive manufacturing processes are pretty amazing. And if you look at the cost that Tesla is seeing for building Model Y in China, they've really got the cost down, and Model 3. So I think it may be that regular manufacturing of vehicles is already very, very efficient. And it's not clear that Cybertruck is that much more cost effective, even though it might be somewhat more cost effective. John asks, what supports the CCIV stock price? That is the SPAC that is supposedly going to merge with Lucid Motors. I don't understand how anybody invests in any of these things. People, what supports the Nikola, the NKLA stock price? I don't understand it. I think that there's something crazy going on there, and I would love to understand it, but I don't. Philip says, wouldn't the competition from Lucid Motors be good for Tesla? Tesla has always had competition. The competition is the internal combustion engine vehicles. 98% of the world transportation market is internal combustion engine vehicles. And Tesla has always had that competition, and Tesla competes with themselves. And I think there will be competition from China. I don't think Lucid is it. Marty asks, might be a better Jordan question, but how will sodium ion batteries work with the 4680 battery form? I don't know enough about sodium ion batteries to say anything useful. I've seen little bits and pieces, but I don't know enough. Let's see. Arthur says, so far, most of SpaceX is nothing but a scam. Most of SpaceX is nothing but a scam. Did you watch the interview? And so is FSD, a clever way to make money, extra money on a vehicle, making the buyer pay for something that doesn't exist. So you lost your credibility, Arthur, when you said that SpaceX is mostly a scam. SpaceX has launched 10 people to the International Space Station. SpaceX is landing orbital rocket boosters and reusing them. One of them has been reused 9 times for a total of 10 uses. SpaceX is delivering payloads to orbit for customers at significantly lower cost than anybody else. It is the dominant launch provider in the market today, especially when you go by mass launch to orbit rather than number of launches. And FSD, I just wrote an FSD beta. I don't think I said this in the live stream. Before I got home for the live stream with interview with Peter, I met with Teslatino. Raphael, his Twitter is Teslatino, and I think he has a YouTube channel, Teslatino, who was an FSD beta driver, and he and I did. He let me ride, and I got to ride an FSD beta, and I will say FSD beta is not done. That's why it's beta. It was not perfect. It made some mistakes, but it was still amazing. And I think people struggle to recognize how fast things improve. So yeah, if you bought FSD, first of all, if you bought FSD earlier, you paid less for it. So if you've had it for a few years, well, you only paid $6,000 for it, $7,000 for it. Congratulations. Ultimately, you're going to have it, and it's going to be amazing. And it's already pretty amazing, if you ask me. Philip says, Dave Lee had an interesting guest yesterday who showed that Tesla is number 3 in U.S. premium car sales after Mercedes and BMW, which was surprising. Thoughts? I don't really worry about the competition for premium car sales. It's a nice metric to look at, but I think what just matters is let's get Giga Berlin running. Let's get Giga Texas running. Let's start producing vehicles in high volume. And, you know, pretty soon, 2023, well, 2022, the Model Y will be the highest revenue vehicle on Earth, and 2023 will be the highest unit volume vehicle on Earth, and that's before the 2023 vehicle comes out. So it's really about executing for the long term. I don't really worry about short term. It's fun to see it, but I think The long term is what's really amazing. Nancy Pelosi will push the EV tax credit, though. I believe that the bill that they talked about is a reconciliation bill, which means Nancy Pelosi is on board with it. So I think the EV tax credit is not going to happen this year. Oh, and Tesla Latino is in the chat. Thank you for joining. Thank you for letting me ride in the FSD beta. Hydrogen fuel technologies. Musk is a frontman rolling out the red carpet out for exotic technologies for the military has suppressed from the public for 100 years. And people think I'm a conspiracy theorist, and I am a conspiracy theorist, but my conspiracy theories are real. So, okay, so let me turn to Tesla news. If you're following it, Elon Musk said in a tweet yesterday that maybe it was the day before yesterday. And for those folks who don't know, I was traveling for the last week, so I've been busy doing other things. He said that FSD beta, which he's constantly been saying it'll probably be ready in 2 weeks, that FSD version 9, Tesla Tina was joking that it's not really, that's not really, that's just that version number that Elon adopted. The real versions are on the software update 2021 point whatever, 0.4 point something. But that version 9, Elon said he is driving an alpha version. It's got a few obvious things that need to be cleared up, and he thinks it may be released. The FSD 2 beta testers, it may be released hopefully in a week. Now, he's usually said probably 2 weeks, and he's been saying that for a few months. So hopefully a week. Is that shorter than probably 2 weeks? I don't know. Charlie Doyle says, name one real conspiracy theory, Warren. Look up Operation Gladio and Google Operation Gladio, Gladio. And there's the other one. What's the one? Operation Northridge or something. There was a proposed operation by the U.S. military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to fake attacks on America, make it look like they came from Cuba as a justification for Cuban invasion. Kennedy said no, and now Kennedy's dead. So I think, Jim, I disagree with you. I think there are many conspiracies. Most of them are small. And most of them, people think there's some like large conspiracies of evil geniuses that are like controlling the world. I think there's like many small conspiracies of not particularly bright people. And sometimes they have significant effects. Will SpaceX use Boxable for Mars living? I think this is a really good question. So actually, let's talk about Boxable. This is a quote news item. Quote news item. It's not really news. There's this idea that SpaceX or that Elon Musk is living in a boxable home in Starbase. It's very clearly not true, because it's already been covered what home he's living in, and it's not a boxable home. It may be that there's a boxable home at Starbase. We're not sure. I think the people who run Boxable, first of all, I love the idea. I love the concept of Boxable, which is basically you mass produce homes and then in a factory and then deliver them to the site and unfold them. Basically, it's a really cool idea. But right now, I don't think Boxable is anywhere close to delivering a product. I think they've got pre-prototypes. I don't even know if they have a significant prototype out yet. I think people are jumping the gun on it. I believe that there's a company called New Community, NEU Community, with Honorbeck. I don't know how to pronounce his name. This guy I met at the Plaid event. They're working on this kind of housing. There's a lot of interesting ideas with like innovations in housing, and I have my own ideas. Operation Northwoods. Yes, thank you. Operation Northwoods. If you want to know about a real conspiracy, look up Operation Northwoods, look up Operation Gladio. And I would say the Manhattan Project was a massive conspiracy. It was a successful conspiracy. Maybe it was ultimately a good conspiracy. You can make your judgment about that, but it was a conspiracy. Charlie Doyle says Kennedy wasn't killed in the conspiracy. It was certainly Oswald. I really don't care. I don't get involved in the conspiracy theories about Kennedy's killing. I don't know why he got killed, and I think it's the best example, the best story of the best way to think about the Kennedy assassination is the Seinfeld episode with Keith Hernandez and the second spitter. So it's not funny that Kennedy was killed, but the conspiracy theories are funny. So I don't think boxable homes are cheaper than manufactured homes. I think boxable homes are more expensive than comparable homes. And that's the problem. Whenever people come up with these new technologies for building homes, it always ends up costing more. And I don't get it. And I've been talking to my friend Peter, this is a guy in Miami, about doing a housing startup. And I think there's some potential. I really think steel buildings are a potential for housing startups, but I don't know that Peter and I are going to get there. And now I'm sort of caught up in my idea of a single passenger vehicle startup. So we'll see. I want to build a robo taxi. So I might work on that. Why don't you talk about exotic lithium and hydrogen tech that Elon and SpaceX lie about having? Okay, so hydrogen fuel technologies is some kind of troll who's now going to be hidden from the channel, because I don't need that kind of behavior. Let's see. All set homes is another one. So Andrew James talks about all set homes. This is another one that was in the quote news the other day. All set homes, Tesla spelled backwards. This is what Andrew says. The logo even has the same E. They changed their names from eHomes this year. I think they changed their name last year. I spoke with All Set Homes. They've been talking. The idea for All Set Homes is that they're going to build homes that use a lot of Tesla technology, solar roof, power wall, Tesla heat pump, HVAC, all this stuff. They haven't built a home yet. They haven't built one. It's a lot of talk until you do it. It's easy to talk. It's hard to do. So they did a press release that got news saying that they had reached a strategic agreement with Tesla to build 20 homes using Tesla technology. As far as I can tell, they made an order for 20 Tesla solar panels, solar panel installations, and power walls, and they haven't built the houses yet. So, you know, when you build a house, I want them to succeed. I don't want this taken the wrong way. I want All Set Homes to succeed. I want Boxable to succeed. I want new communities to succeed. Until you've built something, you haven't built something. It's just talk. And I haven't built something, right? I mean, I have this idea for a single passenger. I have this idea for a single passenger robo taxi, and I actually talked to a key person at Tesla about it, and kind of got the, yeah, we're not doing that. I think it's a really good idea, and I may go ahead and do it. Whether I can pull it off is another question. The idea right now I'm working on is, can I build a prototype on my own money and then crowdfund a more advanced prototype, and then go from there to a funding round to start manufacturing them. And then the idea for this single passenger vehicle is that it's basically only useful in a robo-taxi world, where, because it will be vulnerable to human drivers, it will not be as safe as, it'll be safer than a motorcycle, but it won't be that safe and crash worthy, I should say. There's a whole bunch of issues with it, but, you know, can we get to the point of building a working prototype, and then can we get to the point of getting a funding, crowdfunding to do an advanced prototype, and then do a real funding round and raise significant money to build a factory, to build the machine that builds the machine. Sorry, what was the? Oh, solar roof update. So thank you, Marty, for asking that. I'm going to be making a video this week. My next video will be about solar roof. Short answer is that we need a roof now. We have a roof that is probably going to be installed on our house in July. That's just going to be a regular roof, and we'll hopefully do solar panels in the future. Tesla was delaying, no communication. I finally got an answer from Tesla. The price jump was huge. I think our total cost before the price jump was like $60,000, not counting federal tax credit. And the total price after was something like $100,000 or $110,000, not counting the federal tax credit. And that makes it so expensive that it's only worth it if you just really want to have a cool looking roof, because you're not going to generate enough electricity off of that. The cost of doing a regular premium roof and adding panels is going to be less and generate more electricity. So, and that partly, I think one of the big issues for my house is our roof is complex. If you're building a house with a very simple roof, I think solar roof becomes a lot more competitive. So, yeah, Matt Burns says Q3 sold out. There's a really important Tesla news item. There's stories that Model 3 is sold out through the third quarter. So Tesla has basically sold every Model 3 they're going to make through September already. We're towards the end of quarter two. And I don't think that's crazy. I mean, I have a neighbor who bought a Model 3 and they told me when they ordered it that it was going to be 9 weeks for delivery, which is that's more than 2 months, and a quarter is 3 months. So I don't think that's surprising at all. Tesla bricks. I think you're talking about Boring Company bricks. I haven't seen any progress on Boring Company bricks. I don't think that's a hugely important thing, but I hope it happens. There's an interesting question. I read an article that said that Tesla was transitioning Megapack to lithium iron phosphate, which is going to make it less expensive to build it because the iron phosphate batteries are a lot less expensive. So if Tesla and CATL is scaling production of lithium iron phosphate batteries, so if that is able to happen, then I think that's going to be huge. I think that we are going to see a big increase in Megapack. I think they're already profitable on Powerwall, so they're going to make. And by the way, in my solar roof project, the Powerwall price went up. They included the first one in the project, but the additional Powerwalls were more expensive. Milkius asks, do I think Jeff Bezos is jealous of Musk? I don't think he spends a lot of time thinking about that, but it's possible. I don't really care. I think I'm a Jeff Bezos fan. Don't build a car, Warren. It's going to be really small. I think it's going to cost me like between 20 and 50 grand to build a really, really inexpensive prototype. And then if I can raise the money in a crowdfunding round to build a much nicer prototype and then go to venture capitalists to raise more money, I think that, or, I may be able to skip the venture capitalist round. I think there's a lot of potential here. The problem with the single passenger vehicle is it's probably before its time. The idea that I have, which I talked about in the previous live stream, but I've done a lot more details on what I'm planning, how I'm planning to do it. I really think it's going to work. I really think it's going to be amazing. I really think it's going to be ultimately a low-cost vehicle to make. It's striking if you make the vehicle light and you use regular tires that are, let's say, rated for 75,000 miles, but you use a vehicle that weighs less than half as much as the vehicle that was designed for the 75,000 mile tires, then those tires are going to last 150,000 miles or more. So yeah, Jim on boxable casitas. Exactly. I looked at those numbers. That's exactly where I got to. Kyle, you can email me. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Don't build a car, Warren, build a micro house solution. I think there's a lot of people who are working on, this is the thing. So there's a lot of people working on housing already. And I don't know that I have a lot to offer, that I have some innovative idea that's better. My idea for the single passenger robotaxi is really innovative, and I don't see anybody doing anything like it. Rich rebuilds would be interesting. I have somebody in mind local for the first round prototype, and then I should look up Rich rebuilds to see if they'd be good for that. But I don't want to go away. One of the dangers is if you work with somebody who's too high profile, then you lose control. And Elon has managed to maintain control of all his companies. And I think it's really important, if I do something like this, I'm going to need to maintain control, at least for a while, until it gets closer to reality, because the single passenger robotaxi is going to greatly improve the efficiency of the robotaxi network and the Boring Company tunnels. So, making cars is hard. The key is that this will be less hard than making regular cars, because it's going to be a lot smaller, and it's going to there are certain efficiencies in the design that I've come up with that will be really, really major, and will make it a lot easier. Still hard, but a lot easier. It's stupid. I shouldn't do it, but it was stupid for Elon to start all his companies, and seems to be working out. Resorts World already has signage for Loop. That's cool. I heard that they finished the tunnel, Matt. Boring Company has a project in Las Vegas. I'm going to do a video about that shortly. I covered it a little bit in my most recent live stream, but Boring Company has a project in Las Vegas. That's the Las Vegas Convention Center. When I was there, I was talking to somebody who actually watches the videos, and he told me that the tunnel to Resort World is already done, or almost done. So I think we're going to see the extension of the Las Vegas Convention Center to one of the casinos very, very soon. Casino hotels very, very soon. Building a van for OnlyFans streamers. That's interesting. I have never really watched Rich rebuild, so I don't even know I just know he's a big name. And I think I just need to find a competent engineer slash handyman type person to build a basic prototype just to get something that runs and looks like it. It's not, the first prototype is just going to be something that works. But I think ultimately I can design something that will have very, very long, at least 200 miles of range and probably 300 or 400 miles of range. Be very comfortable, be very, really a good fit. John asks if the Las Vegas tunnel is open to the public. The Las Vegas tunnel is open for conventions. And I went to the World of Concrete convention on a press pass, and I rode the tunnels for that. It will take decades for robo-taxis to replace all human drivers. Even if robo-taxis are better, lots of people will still want to drive and not trust the newfangled machines. I think you're partially correct. I think you're going to see like robo-taxis will come to dominate in the Boring Company tunnel systems. I think cities will decide at some point. You'll see some cities decide they're not going to allow human drivers. I think it's going to be an incremental thing, but you don't, if in the early days, you don't need everyone to ride it, you just need the early adopters. Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be secret. It's just, I'm gonna be filing for a patent shortly on my design. Did I ask tunnel boring company people when they will start on the next tunnels? They already started on it. It's already at Resorts World. I think it's a question of permitting rather than anything else. And I'm not sure where they stand on their permits with Las Vegas. So was there other news? There's no Neuralink news. I think the other big news is that this other big SpaceX news is that we are now expecting, or at least they're shooting for, this is from both Gwynne Shotwell and Elon, that they are targeting an orbital launch of Starship with Super Heavy, maybe in July. I have a feeling that's overly optimistic, and it'll probably be more likely August. But if you haven't seen this, there's a proposal to do an orbital launch where a Super Heavy booster launched from Texas, probably from Starbase, gets a Starship, probably SN20. It might be SN16. I think Elon said it might be SN16. Up to sort of orbit, goes around the Earth a little less than once, and does a soft water landing, hopefully off the coast of Lanai in Hawaii, not Lanai, Kauai, about 60 kilometers off the coast of Kauai in Hawaii. So that's going to be interesting. Did I ask? Let's see. Glenn Tiemann says we need 10,000 proof rocks boring tunnels under every city on Earth. I think we're going to see 100 miles of tunnel under the average city the size of Las Vegas. I think there are 1,000 cities on Earth that are roughly the size of Las Vegas. And we'll see 100 miles of tunnel under each. And then we're going to see tunnels between cities. That's going to be big. And then, my fantasy for those who follow my channel, Boring Bearing. Check my channel out for the Boring Bearing video. Starship will orbit before Blue Origin. I don't think that's even a question. I think Starship will orbit before Blue Origin launches. Before Blue Origin has a test launch. All right, we're over 2 hours. So I don't know how much longer I want to go because I'm tired. I don't know if it's obvious that I'm tired. I had a busy week. I'm driving. The reason we're doing the video today instead of tomorrow is because I'm driving a kid to camp tomorrow. And that's going to be 5 hours on the road. Do I think that Boring Company will also be mining precious metals and rare earth elements on Mars, Moon, and other celestial bodies? No. I thought that idea originally, and I have come to understand that mining is just a completely different thing from boring tunnels. That mining is really, really specific to, you figure out where the material is and you go for it. You don't just dig big tunnels and get the materials out of it. Tunnel houses is an interesting idea. I'd like to see that. 12 foot in diameter. I don't know if that tunnel house thing idea works. It's interesting. Any chance Tesla will buy Boxable? I don't think that buying Boxable is a serious idea for Tesla. I don't think that Boxable has anything that unique. I think there's other companies like New Community that have something like that. NEU Community, Honorbeck. I might be interviewing Honorbeck in a week or two, talk about what they're doing, because I find him more credible than Boxable. Even let me be clear, I like Boxable. I like the concept. I just think if you're going to do radical housing innovation, make it cost less. And doing a 200 square foot house, or what's it, 20 by 400 square foot house for $50,000 just for the house, I got to add in foundation at $75,000. This is not a radical innovation. Do something radical. come up with a way of building homes really, really inexpensively, so that you can deliver value to, and, don't do this, outfitted with stainless steel appliances and all this fancy stuff. Come up with a basic structure and let people do something with it. Just do that. Just get to the point where you can build a simple cabin, which is of course what I want, is a simple cabin. Let people get their cabin up and running with some plumbing and electricity and, solar on the roof or whatever, but make it just barely viable, and then people can do what they want with it, rather than they're making luxury homes, luxury tiny homes. I don't think rich people want to live in tiny homes. I live in a 3,200 square foot house. You want me to move in I lived in a 400 square foot apartment when I was 25 for a year, and I was fine with it. But now that I live in a 3,200 square foot house, I don't know that I can go back to 400 square feet. I'm willing to give it a shot. I don't think most people my age and my wealth are willing to do that. If subways could be dug with the same tunneling technology. I'm sorry, I have to take this call because it might relate to my mom. Hello, this is Warren. Yes. I can't really talk right now. Can you call me back in a half hour? What? Yes, you can. Please. Thank you. Sorry about that. Family issues come up. I hate when that happens. No, my kid is not going to space camp. My kid is going to ranch camp. If subways could be dug with the same tunneling technology as Proof Rock, would you like to see a city like Chicago have a big metro or a boring system with FSD cars? Okay, so one of the big innovations for Boring Company is smaller diameter tunnels, because it means you do a lot less work to do the tunnels. And I rode in them. I think the system that they've got is great. I don't think there's a need for bigger tunnels. I think Boring Company is talking to somebody about doing larger diameter tunnels for cargo. I don't think that's really necessary, but they know better than I do. But I think it's just plain and simple. The boring system is great. And I think ultimately, if you go to this one passenger vehicle that's 3 feet wide instead of 6 feet wide, then you can fit 2 of them in the tunnel at the same time. And you've just doubled the bandwidth of your system, and maybe more, because they're shorter as well. They're smaller vehicles front to back, so you can squeeze more in front and back. And if you make them self-driving and they coordinate with each other or whatever, they work well together, then you're just massively increasing the carrying capacity of your system. So I think that's huge. Let's see. Yeah, Jim Whitehead. I mean, I agree with that. That's the idea. It's a second home behind the main house for grandma or whatever. I don't think that Boxable is a serious player in really changing things. Tesla Tino says the real Tesla Storm will be the $25,000 car. I completely agree. I think there's 2 Tesla Storms coming. I think the $25,000 vehicle, which I think may actually end up costing less than $25,000, and it'll be a variety of them. And the other big storm is Robotaxi. Robotaxi, like, Tesla Tino was in the chat. He let me ride in his FSD beta today. I got to see it in person. It's not perfect, it's flawed, and it's still amazing. And I think when self-driving hits and robotaxis hit, it's just like radical change in society, and people cannot see it coming. It's really striking to me how few people see how radical the change is going to be. Any concern on Tesla's ability? Ed Stockwell asked, any concern on Tesla's ability to get batteries to meet all their car needs over the next few years? Well, yeah, I mean, batteries are the limiting factor. I would encourage you to watch the channel Limiting Factor to see his talk about batteries. But it's very clear to me that CATL, Contemporary Amperex Technologies Limited, the Chinese company, is scaling up their production of lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're going to hit 1,200 gigawatt hours of lithium iron phosphate cells by 2025 or 2026. That's a lot of batteries. 1,200 gigawatt hours is a lot of batteries, 1.2 terawatt hours. Tesla is scaling up their own battery production. I think it's going well. I talked to a Tesla, highly placed person in Tesla, very comfortable with the conversation. I think Tesla's 4680 cell lines are going to be happening soon, and they're going to deliver a lot of batteries, and that's going to make a big difference. I think Tesla's other suppliers, Panasonic and LG Chem, are scaling up their production of batteries. It's probably still a limiting factor. It's going to be a limiting factor for a while, but we are going to see massive increases in battery supply, massive increases in vehicles, massive increases in megapack, and hopefully soon we're going to see massive increases in Powerwall and solar. It's all coming. It's sort of like, there's these bottlenecks that are slowing it down, and I think it's all coming. So Matt Burns says 8.3 was supposed to be 1,000 iterations better than 8.2. I believe 8.3 is never coming, and version 9, which Tesla Tino thinks is a joke calling it version 9, but version 9, which Elon has said is an alpha now, version 9 will be in beta soon, and that will be 1,000. I don't think he said it was 1,000 iterations better. I think he said it had 1,000 improvements. And I think Andre Karpathy said they've been through 7 iterations of what they're working on, and so they're getting closer. 4680 yield is improving. I just know that my conversation was, the short story is that 4680 Tesla is 2 years ahead of its suppliers on 4680 cell production. So I think that we're going to see Tesla 4680s this year and in production in vehicles this year, and we're going to see supplier 4680s in production in vehicles in 2023. So John Jacobs said, I think they just found a huge reserve for battery production in Australia. I'm not sure what you mean. Ken, I did read that Boring Company might build larger tunnels. There's also talk of them building larger tunnels in Fort Lauderdale for trains. A lot of their technology is good for tunneling in a lot of ways, but I think the future is really these 14-foot diameter tunnels that have concrete segments that shore them up, that make them 12-foot diameter tunnels, that is good enough. And that low cost is a huge value. Marty Party says the 18650 is so good in the Plaid. Imagine how good that chemistry will be in the 4680s. My impression is that the chemistry in the 1865 cell that's in the Model S Plaid is the same chemistry that was in the 2020 Tesla Model S. The radical improvement in Plaid is not the battery. The radical improvements in Plaid are massive weight saving and the motor, the alien technology in the motor, the carbon fiber wrap rotor are two of those are finding ways to save weight. They saved a huge amount of weight all over the car, and getting the rotor to spin to 20,000 RPMs or 18,000 RPMs. Those are huge. Matt Burns asks, all Cybertruck 4680. I'm undecided on Cybertruck, whether it's going to be all 4680. I think Tri-Motor will very likely be 4680 cells. I think it's possible that dual motor might be something else. I'm not sure whether the plan is that if it's going to be structural pack, I think the question is, can you do structural pack with 2170 cells? The answer is probably yes. Cybertruck 4680 is probably better for structural pack, but it seems to me it would make sense that you could do structural pack with 2170 cells, and that doesn't seem like a big leap. It doesn't seem like a really hard problem. If you can do it with 4680, why can't you do it with 2170? I'm not sure there's a reason you can't do it. It might even be better for structural pack. So the challenge is, can you do it with prismatic? And I think the answer is no. Prismatic is like the boxes. They're like rectangular boxes. That's what they're using in the Made in China Model 3, as far as I know. I don't think there's a challenge in minerals for battery production. It's a challenge, but I don't think that's a huge problem. Will cars go faster than 40 miles per hour in the Las Vegas Convention Center tunnel? I think in the convention center for now, no. I think that in the Las Vegas loop, the larger system, they will go faster than 40 miles an hour. I don't see any reason that they couldn't go faster than 40 miles an hour in the section that they have. I think there's just not a particular advantage to going faster than 40 miles an hour. The system is 0.8 miles long. So at 40 miles an hour, you basically get from one end of the system to the other in a little over a minute. You slow down for the station in the middle, but you slow down to 10 miles an hour. So I think the gain of going to 100 miles an hour would be trivial. And then, there's a vehicle in front of you that's slowing down for the station. So I just don't think it adds that much to go faster than 40 miles an hour in that section of the tunnel. There may be other sections of the tunnel, like going to the airport, where they'll go faster. But I don't think the speed is the key. The real advantages of the Boring Company tunnel system are that you don't stop between where you get on and where you get off, because the stations are designed with, you know, a spot for vehicles that are stopping and a lane for vehicles that aren't, and the lane for vehicles that aren't go through it like 8-10 miles an hour, make sure you don't hurt anybody and, you know, don't create a problem in the station. But they don't stop for a minute or 2 minutes, they just go. So you save a huge amount of time by not stopping. And, you know, the Vegas loop is supposed to have like 46 stations. So if you're going from one end of the system to the other and you don't have to make 46 stops, you know, you think about a lot of municipal buses and how many stops they make. It's crazy. Still have to cool the 2170s, so they'll need tablets. I believe the 2170s don't heat up as much as 4680s without tablets. I think the 2170s heat up about as much as 4680s with tablets. So I don't think cooling is going to be a huge problem for 2170s, and they have to cool them anyway. Does Florida provide an EV credit? I believe the answer to that is no. Would Tesla in the future choose anything else than metal for a car's outer skin? I don't know that Tesla would do that. I do think that that's a really viable option for a future single passenger robo-taxi and maybe other vehicles. I think the point is that you could go to a less sturdy structure when you put it in an environment where there will be no crashes. So in a boring company loop system, I think crashes are going to be non-existent, you know, like near zero. And so the crash worthiness becomes less important. And also you don't have the way the system is designed, there's, even if there was a collision, it would be at low velocity. So I think you might not need, and so far I didn't see anything close to a collision, but if there was going to be a collision, you know, in the stations, everyone's going 8 to 10 miles an hour. And there's no potential for head-ons because of the way the design is. So you're just talking about like a little angle collision, like one vehicle's trying to get in, one vehicle's coming out of the tunnel, one vehicle's making a U-turn, one's coming out of the tunnel, and they hit like this. If they're going 8 miles an hour each, you know, there's no real problem. It's a minor collision. So I think in a context like that, some kind of very lightweight shell would make a lot of sense. All right, I'm sorry that I'm going to cut this off because I'm tired. Will Tesla wrap Cybertrucks? I don't think Tesla will wrap them. I think outsiders will wrap them. Tesla doesn't wrap cars now. So I want to thank everybody for watching. Please check out the merch, Mars Landing, Starship, link in the description below. I think I put a link to this shirt in the description below. The Elon, go to elonbits.com for the stainless steel water bottle, a whole bunch of other t-shirts. Thank you so much to the Vasa law firm in Sweden and all my Patreon supporters for helping this channel grow. Thank you to my YouTube channel members. Please consider joining Patreon. I personally prefer Patreon, but joining YouTube channel is great. Join the channel, support the channel. I think I'm closing in on 300 between Patreon and YouTube channel members. I really appreciate all these people, all of you supporting this channel, supporting what I'm doing. I probably want to say something else, but I can't think of it. I guess I'm tired. I had a long week and, you know, it's getting tough. So thanks everyone for watching. Stay tuned. Video this week, I'm going to do a video about solar roof, and I hopefully will do a second video about the Boring Company tunnel system. And yes, I should be live next Sunday at the normal time. Thanks everyone.